My name is Margaret Harrison. I'm 67 years old, and on Thanksgiving Day, my successful son asked me what I'd done with the lake house he'd bought me 2 years ago, a house I never knew existed. Before I tell you all about the moment I watched my manipulative daughter-in-law get led away in handcuffs, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. This story is a wild ride, and I need to know who is here with me. The smell of pine-scented disinfectant is one you never quite get used to. For 15 years, it had been the perfume of my life. It clung to my clothes, my hair, and I'm certain it had seeped into my very bones. That night, a Tuesday in late November, was no different. The halls of the office building were long and silent, the only sound the rhythmic squeak of my cart's wheels on the polished linoleum. At 67, my body felt every single squeak. A deep, persistent ache had settled in my lower back, a constant companion on these lonely nights. I paused to catch my breath, leaning against the cart and looking out the large window at the city lights twinkling below. They looked like scattered diamonds on black velvet. It was the beautiful view, the kind of view people with important jobs and big salaries paid a lot of money for. For me, it was just a reminder of a world I cleaned up after, but could never truly be a part of. My late husband, Robert, would have hated seeing me like this. After his funeral 3 years ago, the small inheritance he'd left was eaten up faster than I could have imagined by hospital bills and house repairs. What was left wasn't enough. "Just get through the week, Margie," I whispered to my reflection in the dark glass. My own face looked tired, the lines around my eyes deeper than I remembered. Just get to Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving. The thought of it was a small, warm candle in the vast, cold emptiness of my week. My son, my David, was coming. He and his wife, Victoria, were driving up from the city. David was my world, my pride and joy. He'd built a successful tech consulting firm from the ground up. He was smart, driven, and had a life I could only dream of. I hadn't seen him in 6 months, not since his birthday. He was always so busy. A promotion here, a big project there. I understood. I was just proud of him. The thought of his visit spurred me on. I had one last bathroom to clean. As I sprayed the mirrors, I thought about the turkey sitting in my small refrigerator. It had cost nearly a full day's pay, but it was worth it. I'd also bought cranberries to make my special sauce, the kind that David had loved since he was a little boy. I'd even splurged on a bottle of sparkling cider. I wanted everything to be perfect. My Social Security check didn't stretch far, and my janitor's salary barely covered the rent and utilities. But for David, I would have spent my last dime. In fact, I'd practically had. The electric bill was sitting on my counter, a final notice stamped in red. I'd have to pay it on Friday, which meant the rest of the month would be tight. It was a familiar dance. Last month, I'd had to make a choice, a full prescription of my blood pressure medication or a full week of groceries. I chose the groceries and spent the last 2 weeks carefully splitting my little white pills in half with a kitchen knife. Dr. Wilson would have a fit if he knew, but what choice did I have? A woman has to eat. Finishing my shift, I bundled up against the biting November wind and walked the 3 blocks to my apartment building. It was an old brick building with drafty windows and plumbing that groaned like a dying man. Inside, my apartment was small but clean. I'd spent my day off scrubbing it from top to bottom. On the mantelpiece sat my favorite photo of Robert and I, much younger me, smiling on our wedding day. Next to it was David's college graduation picture. He had my eyes, but Robert's determined jaw. "Oh, Robert," I sighed, tracing his face in the photo. "You should see our boy now. So successful." I knew he'd be proud, but I also knew he'd be worried sick about me. He was the kind of man who took care of things. He'd never have let me get into a state where I was choosing between medicine and food. Before bed, I laid out my best tablecloth, the one with the embroidered autumn leaves that I only used for special occasions. I polished my silverware till it gleamed. Everything had to be just right. This Thanksgiving wasn't just a meal. It was a performance. It was my way of showing my successful son and his sophisticated wife that his old mother was doing just fine, that she wasn't a burden, that she still had things under control. It was a lie, of course. A beautiful, carefully constructed lie, held together by love and desperation. And as I drifted off to sleep, I had no idea that in less than 48 hours, that lie would be shattered into a million pieces. Thanksgiving Day dawned gray and cold. but my little apartment was filled with warmth and the rich, savory smell of roasting turkey. I had been up since 6 a.m., basting the bird, peeling potatoes, and letting the dough for my dinner rolls rise in a warm spot by the radiator. By 3 in the afternoon, everything was ready. The table was set, the food was warming in the oven, and I had changed into my best dress, a simple navy blue one I'd owned for years. Right on time, I heard the purr of an expensive engine outside. I peeked through the blinds and saw it, a sleek black Mercedes that looked completely out of place on my rundown street. David and Victoria had arrived. I opened the door before they even knocked, a wide, genuine smile on my face. "There's my boy," I said, pulling David into a tight hug. He was taller than I remembered, handsome in cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Victoria stood behind him, a vision in cream-colored coat and leather boots. She held a bouquet of perfect store-bought lilies. She said, "Margaret, happy Thanksgiving. These are for you." "Oh, Victoria, they're beautiful. You shouldn't have," I said, taking the flowers. They were lovely, but they also felt impersonal, like something you'd give to a business associate. I put them in a vase, a pang of something I couldn't name twisting in my gut. I quickly pushed it away. This was a day for happiness. The meal was a success. David raved about the turkey and had 3 helpings of my mashed potatoes. Victoria picked elegantly at her food, praising everything, though she ate very little. They talked about their life in the city, a whirlwind of dinner parties, charity galas, and a recent trip to Italy. I listened, nodding and smiling, feeling like an audience member watching a play about a life I couldn't comprehend. "We're thinking of buying a bigger place," David said as I cleared the main course plates. "Oh, that would be lovely, dear," I said, my heart swelling with pride. As I brought out the pumpkin pie, the one I'd made from scratch, David leaned back in his chair, a contented look on his face. He looked around my small living room, his eyes scanning the familiar, worn furniture. Then he said the words that would change everything. He said them casually, with a lazy smile, as if he were commenting on the weather. "Mom, how are you enjoying the lake house? I know you've always loved being near the water. The fall colors up there must be incredible this time of year." The pie plate nearly slipped from my hands. The air in the room seemed to freeze. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic, my own heart beating a frantic, sudden rhythm against my ribs. What house?" I managed to say, my voice a hoarse whisper. David's smile faltered. He chuckled, a little confused. "The lake house, Mom. The one I bought for you, on Lake Morrison, for your retirement. It's been 2 years now." I stared at him, my mind a complete blank. Lake Morrison. I knew the area. It was beautiful, exclusive, a place where wealthy people had summer homes. It was a world away from my life of mopping floors and splitting pills. "David, I don't know what you're talking about," I said, setting the pie down on the table with a thud. My hands were shaking. "I've never received a lake house. I've never even been to Lake Morrison." I saw the confusion in David's eyes turn to concern. He glanced at Victoria. She had gone utterly still, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth. Her face was a mask of pleasant interest, but her eyes were wide with terror she couldn't conceal. In that instant, I knew. I didn't know how, but I knew. Victoria quickly recovered. She let out a little tinkling laugh. "Oh, David, you know your mother. She's so humble. She probably didn't want to make a big fuss about it. Tell him, Margaret. You probably just tucked the deed away and forgot about it." Her words were meant to be a lifeline, a way to smooth over the awkward moment. But to me, they sounded like the hiss of a snake. She was trying to put words in my mouth, to make me a part of her lie. My gaze locked with hers, and in that split second, I saw past the perfect makeup and the expensive clothes. I saw the desperate, calculating woman beneath. "Victoria," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, "I think you know I haven't forgotten anything." The silence that followed was thick and heavy. David looked from my face to his wife's, the dawning horror beginning to register. The beautiful, perfect Thanksgiving I had worked so hard to create had just exploded, and the fallout was only just beginning to settle. The air in my small apartment was thick with unspoken words. Victoria's forced smile had vanished, replaced by a pale, tight-lipped expression.
David looked like he'd been punched in the gut. "Mom, what do you mean?" he asked, his voice strained. "I don't understand. I signed the papers myself. A nice two-bedroom cottage right on the water. I arranged for the property taxes to be paid, and I set up an automatic transfer. $1,500 a month for your expenses. It's been going into your account every month for 24 months. $1,500 a month. The number echoed in my head. That was more than my entire monthly salary. That was the difference between splitting pills and living healthy. It was the difference between worrying about the electric bill and living in peace. It was a fortune. "David," I said, my voice trembling despite my effort to keep it steady, "I have one bank account. My Social Security and my paycheck are direct deposited there. There has never been another deposit, not for $1,500, not for 15 cents. I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. He loved me, I knew that, but he also loved his wife. He lived with her. He built a life with her. I was just his old mother who he saw twice a year. Who was he to believe? "There must be some mistake," he said, pulling out his phone. "A banking error. I'll call them." "There's no mistake," I said, my gaze still fixed on Victoria, who was staring intently at her empty plate as if it held the secrets of the universe. Victoria finally looked up. Tears welled in her eyes. "Margaret, David, I'm so sorry," she stammered, her voice thick with practiced emotion. "My parents, they were about to lose their house. Their mortgage company was foreclosing. I didn't know what to do. I borrowed the money and the house. I let them stay there, just temporarily, until they could get back on their feet. I was going to pay it all back, I swear." It was a masterful performance. The dutiful daughter forced into a desperate act to save her aging parents. She was painting a picture of a temporary, misguided solution, not a cold, calculated theft. For a moment, David seemed to soften. He looked at her with a pained expression. "Victoria, why didn't you just tell me? We could have helped them." But I wasn't buying it. Not for a second. The carefully constructed wall of politeness inside me crumpled, and years of quiet hardship came rushing out. "Borrowed it," I said, my voice rising, sharp with an anger I hadn't felt in years. I stood up and walked over to the small kitchen counter. My hands were shaking, but my movements were precise. I picked up the orange plastic bottle containing my blood pressure pills and shook it. The sound of the 3 remaining half pills rattling inside the room was loud in the silent room. "Do you know what this is, Victoria?" I asked, holding it out. "This is my medication. I take a half a pill a day because I can't afford a full prescription. Do you think that's because I enjoy living on the edge of a heart attack?" I pointed to the refrigerator. "That turkey in there? I spent my last $20 on it. I've been eating oatmeal for dinner for the past week so I could afford to make a nice meal for my son. For you!" Then I walked to the small desk in the corner and picked up the envelope with the red stamp. I threw it on the table in front of David. "And this is a final notice from the electric company. They're threatening to shut off my power. Does that sound like a woman who has a secret lake house and an extra $1,500 a month?" David stared at the bill, his face ashen. He looked at me, truly looked at me, for what felt like years. He saw the worn fabric of my dress, the exhaustion in my eyes, the tremor in my hands. He saw the truth. He turned to Victoria, his voice low and dangerous. "You let my mother live like this?" Victoria shrank back, the tears now real streams of panic. "I didn't know it was that bad. I thought she was fine. My parents have diabetes. He needed the care." "My mother could have died, Victoria," David said, his voice cracking. "A stroke, a heart attack, while your family was living it up in her house, on her money."
The perfect Thanksgiving was over. The house felt cold and sullied. Victoria grabbed her coat and purse, sobbing that she needed some air. She ran out of the apartment, leaving behind the scent of her expensive perfume and the wreckage of our family. David just sat there, staring at the half-eaten pie on the table, his head in his hands. The silence between us wasn't peaceful anymore. It was the sound of a deep, profound betrayal, and I had a sickening feeling that we had only just scratched the surface of it. After Victoria fled, a heavy, suffocating silence filled my apartment. David didn't move for a long time. He just sat there, staring into space, the picture of a man whose world had been turned upside down.
I went about the grim task of clearing the table, my hands moving on autopilot. The beautiful meal I'd prepared now seemed like a mockery. Finally, David looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with a pain that mirrored my own. "Mom, I am so sorry." "It's not your fault, David," I said, though a small, bitter part of me thought that it was. He hadn't checked. He hadn't called. He had just trusted, blindly. "Yes, it is," he said, his voice firm. "I should have known. I should have paid more attention." He stood up, a new resolve hardening his features. "We're going to get to the bottom of this, right now." He pulled out his phone again. This time, he didn't hesitate. He dialed a number from his contacts. "Rebecca, it's David. I'm sorry to bother you on Thanksgiving, but this is an emergency. A family emergency." He put the phone on speaker. A woman's professional, slightly flustered voice came through. "David, is everything okay?" "Not really. Rebecca, I need you to do something for me, and it needs to be completely off the record. Can you pull up the file on the Lake Morrison property, the one I purchased for my mother 2 years ago?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. I heard the faint sound of typing. "David," Rebecca said, her voice cautious now, "that's, a sensitive file. Victoria handled all the arrangements for that. She said it was a private family matter and to direct all inquiries to her." My blood ran cold. Victoria had built a wall around her deception from the very beginning. "I'm aware of that, Rebecca. I need you to bypass her. I need to see the account details for the monthly transfers, the destination account." "This could be, problematic," Rebecca said slowly. I could hear the unspoken words, "This could cost me my job." She had a family, a salary to protect. I wouldn't have blamed her for refusing. She was loyal to David, her boss, but Victoria was his wife. It was a terrible position to be in. There was another long pause. "Please, Rebecca," David said, his voice raw. "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't the most important thing in the world." I heard a sigh, then more determined typing. "Okay, I'm in. The property is deeded to Margaret Harrison. The monthly transfers of $1,500 plus several additional transfer for medical expenses and property upkeep have been going to a checking account at a different bank. The account is also under the name Margaret Harrison." She read out the bank name and the account number. It was a bank I'd never used in my life. "The mailing address on that account," she continued, her voice tight with disbelief, "is a P.O. box in a town 30 miles from here." It was all there. A separate, secret life created with my name. A ghost version of me who was living comfortably while the real me was counting pennies and splitting pills. "Rebecca," David said, his voice like ice, "send me everything you have. Every document, every transfer record. Send it to my personal email right now." "I'm sending it now," she replied. "David, I'm so sorry." "Thank you, Rebecca. You have no idea what this means." He hung up. The confirmation was absolute, undeniable. For 2 years, my own daughter-in-law had been systematically stealing from me, using my name as a mask for her greed. David started pacing the small room like a caged animal, running his hair through his hands. "The P.O. box, the separate bank, she planned this, Mom. This wasn't a mistake. This was a plan." The front door opened and Victoria walked in. Her face was tear-streaked, her eyes puffy. She had clearly been working up her next performance. "David, honey," she began, her voice a pathetic whimper, "we can fix this. I'll pay your mother back. Every cent. We can sell some stock." David held up a hand, stopping her cold. "Save it, Victoria," he said, his voice devoid of all warmth. "I just spoke to Rebecca." The color drained from Victoria's face. The last of her defenses crumbled. She knew she was caught. "She confirmed everything," David continued. "The secret bank account, the P.O. box, the extra money you took for medical expenses." "Whose medical expenses, Victoria? Your parents?" She just stood there, mute. The reluctant witness, Rebecca, had become the star prosecutor. Her hesitation, her fear for her job, had made her testimony all the more powerful. She had risked something to uncover the truth, and in doing so, she had given me the one thing I needed most: proof. The truth was out, and it was far uglier than I could have ever imagined. The confrontation in my tiny apartment felt like a pressure cooker about to explode. Victoria, stripped of her lies, seemed to shrink before my eyes. The sophisticated, confident woman was gone, replaced by a cornered animal. I expected more tears, more desperate pleas for forgiveness. I was wrong. When she finally spoke, her voice was no longer soft and pleading. It was hard, laced with a venom that shocked me. "You did this," she hissed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You were never happy for us. You were always jealous of David's success, of what we have." David stepped forward. "Don't you dare, Victoria. Don't you dare try to turn this on my mother." "Oh, really, David?" she shot back, her eyes flashing. "Are you that blind? Can't you see what's happening? She's an old woman. She's lonely. She's probably been imagining things for years." I felt the air leave my lungs. It was a brazen, vicious attack, designed to hit David where he was most vulnerable, his guilt over his own neglect. "She's getting old, honey," she continued, her voice dropping into a tone of faux concern, a performance aimed solely at her husband. "She's getting old. People change when they get older. They get forgetful, confused. Sometimes they get paranoid. They make things up to get attention." She walked toward him, placing a hand on his arm. "I'm worried about her. We should be talking about getting her proper care, not yelling at me for a simple mistake I made trying to help my own family." It was the most audacious, cruel lie I had ever heard. She was trying to paint me as mentally incompetent, as a senile old woman who couldn't be trusted. She was trying to poison my own son against me. For a horrific moment, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in David's eyes. He looked at me, then back at Victoria. The seed of doubt she had planted was a potent one. Had he been so disconnected that he didn't know my state of mind? Could I really have become so lost? The thought was terrifying, a deeper violation than the stolen money. She wasn't just trying to take my inheritance. She was trying to steal my sanity, my credibility, my very identity in the eyes of my son. "That's enough," I said, my voice cutting through the tense air. It wasn't loud, but it was filled with a cold fury that made them both fall silent. "Get out of my house, Victoria." "Margaret, I'm just trying to—" "I said get out," I repeated, pointing to the door. "Now!" Victoria looked at David, expecting him to intervene, to defend her. But David's face was a mask of conflict. He was trapped between the woman he had built a life with and the mother who had given him that life. He didn't move. With a final, hateful glare at me, Victoria grabbed her things and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The silence she left behind was heavy with her poisonous words. David sank onto the couch, his head in his hands again. "Mom, is it possible—" he started, then trailed off, unable to finish the question. "Is it possible that I'm losing my mind?" I finished for him, my voice flat. The hurt was a physical thing, a sharp pain in my chest. "Is that what you're asking, David?" "No, of course not," he said quickly, too quickly. "It's just, this is insane. All of it. Yes, it is. And your wife is the one who made it that way." I knew then that I couldn't rely on David alone. His love for me was real, but so was his connection to Victoria. She had years of experience manipulating him, and she had just shown she would stop at nothing to save herself. His guilt made him vulnerable. I was on my own. I had to be. I had to be smarter. I had to be stronger. I spent the next 2 days in a daze, the ugly scene replaying in my mind. On Saturday morning, I woke up with a new clarity. Pity wouldn't help me. Anger wouldn't help me. I needed a plan. I needed a weapon. I thought about what Victoria had said, her attempt to label me as confused and old. The world is quick to dismiss women my age. I knew that. But I wasn't confused, and I wasn't weak. I started digging through the old metal box where Robert had kept all his important papers. It was filled with old insurance policies, his military service records, and the deed to our first tiny house. And then I found it. Tucked in a yellowed envelope was his union membership card from the factory where he'd worked for 40 years before he retired. I remember him talking about the benefits, the pension, the things he'd earned through a lifetime of hard labor. He once mentioned something about a legal assistance program for retirees. It was a long shot, but it was all I had. Victoria had made a critical mistake. She had underestimated me. She saw a frail, poor old woman. She didn't see the woman who had raised a son on her own after Robert got laid off, the woman who had balanced budgets down to the last penny, the woman who had endured 15 years of back-breaking work without a single complaint. She had attacked my mind, and in doing so, she had ignited it. The counterattack was over. My turn was about to begin. On Monday morning, I didn't go to the bank with David or call his high-powered corporate lawyers. I did something for myself. Clutching the worn union card from Robert's old metal box, I took a city bus to a part of town I rarely visited. The address I had found online led me to a modest brick building, the kind with a sign out front that had seen better days, UAW Local 724 Retiree Support Center. The air inside smelled of stale coffee and old paper. A woman with kind eyes and a tired smile directed me to a small office at the end of a hallway. The name on the door read, Benjamin Carter, Legal Aid Services. I knocked, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm. The door opened, and a young man stood before me. He couldn't have been much older than 30. He had a shock of unruly brown hair, glasses that were slightly crooked, and he was wearing a tie that was loosened at the collar. He looked overworked and underpaid, but his eyes were sharp and intelligent. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked. "My name is Margaret Harrison," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "My late husband, Robert Harrison, was a member of this union. I was told you might be able to offer some legal advice." He invited me in. His office was a cramped space, piled high with books and manila folders. It was the office of someone fighting battles on a shoestring budget. For some reason, that gave me confidence. "Please, have a seat," he said, clearing a stack of files off a chair. "What seems to be the problem?" I took a deep breath and began to tell my story. I started with Thanksgiving Day and the question about the lake house. I told him about this secret bank account, the P.O. box, and the monthly payments I never received. I told him about Victoria's confession and her subsequent vicious counterattack, her attempt to paint me as senile. I laid it all out, calmly and chronologically, just the facts. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I presented my case like I was reporting a leaky faucet to a building supervisor. Ben Carter listened intently, his pen flying across a yellow legal pad. He didn't interrupt. He just listened, his sharp eyes never leaving my face. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair, looking at the notes he had taken. "Mrs. Harrison," he said, "this is quite a story." "It's all true," I said simply. "I believe you," he replied, and the simple sincerity in his voice almost made me break down. "This goes far beyond a family dispute over money. If what you're saying is accurate, your daughter-in-law has likely committed several felonies. Bank fraud, wire fraud, identity theft." He leaned forward, a spark of excitement in his eyes. This wasn't just another small claims case for him. This was something big. "The problem, of course, is proof. Your son's assistant, Rebecca, she's the key. If she can provide the documentation for those transfers and the creation of that fraudulent account, we have a starting point." "My son is conflicted," I admitted. "He wants to believe me, but his wife is being very manipulative. She's trying to discredit her primary accuser. It's a classic tactic. That's why we can't rely on your son to drive this. You need to be the one in control." This is your fight." Hearing him say it solidified the resolve that had been building inside me. This wasn't about getting David to save me. This was about me saving myself. "What do we do first?" I asked. "First, I need you to authorize me to act as your lawyer," he said, sliding a form across the desk. "This service is a benefit of your husband's union membership. It won't cost you anything up front. If we recover damages, our office takes a standard percentage. If not, you owe nothing." It was a lifeline, a real lawyer, my own lawyer. The feeling of power that washed over me was intoxicating. I signed the paper with a firm, steady hand.
"Good," Ben said, taking the form. "Now, I need you to do something difficult. I need you to let your son know you've retained counsel. Tell him your lawyer's name is Ben Carter and that he'll be in touch. Don't argue with him. Don't try to convince him of anything. Just state it as a fact. Let him and his wife react to that." "And what will you be doing?" I asked. A slow smile spread across his face. "I'm going to send a polite but very firm request for documents to your son's company, citing my representation of you. And I'm going to file a subpoena for the records of that fraudulent bank account. We're going to stop talking about what Victoria did. We're going to start proving it." I walked out of that little office feeling taller than I had in years. The city streets didn't seem so intimidating anymore. I had an ally. I had a plan. Victoria thought she was playing chess with a pawn. She was about to find out she was playing against a queen who had just found her rook. My janitor's gambit had been accepted. The game was on. That evening, I did as Ben Carter had instructed. I called David. "Hi, Mom. Is everything okay?" he asked, his voice wary. We hadn't spoken since the ugly confrontation with Victoria. "I'm fine, David," I said, keeping my tone level and calm. "I'm calling to let you know that I've hired a lawyer to help me with this situation. His name is Ben Carter. He'll be in touch with you or your company soon." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "A lawyer? Mom, don't you think that's a bit drastic? This is a family matter. We can handle this ourselves. I told you I'd make sure you get the money back." This stopped being a family matter when your wife accused me of being mentally incompetent, I said, my voice sharp. "This is about my name, David, my reputation. It's not about the money anymore." This was a slight lie. The money mattered a great deal, but my dignity mattered more. "A lawyer," he murmured, as if tasting a foreign word. I don't want this to turn into some ugly legal battle. Think about the effect this could have. A divorce, the family. Your wife started this battle, David, not me. I have to go now. I'll talk to you soon." I hung up before he could argue further. I had planted the seed. Now I had to trust my lawyer to do his work. And Ben Carter worked fast. 2 days later, he called me. "Margaret, it's Ben. I have an update. David's assistant, Rebecca, complied with my request for documents. She sent them directly to me. She's a smart woman. She knew she was legally obligated to, and I think she was happy to have a formal request to protect her. The paperwork is damning." He continued, "But that's not why I'm calling. I subpoenaed the records from that fraudulent bank account. Margaret, this is much worse than we thought." I sat down, gripping the phone tightly. "What do you mean?" He said, "Victoria didn't just divert the $1,500 a month. She used that account and your good credit as a launch pad for a whole series of fraudulent activities. She used your identity to apply for 3 high-limit credit cards." I gasped. "Credit cards?" She maxed them all out, over $30,000 in charges. Luxury clothing, spa treatments, electronics, a down payment on her parents' new car. Each word was a physical blow. While I was scrubbing toilets and worrying about my grocery bill, she was living a life of luxury on my stolen name. "But that's not all," Ben said, and I braced myself. "This part is serious, Margaret. She listed you as a dependent on her and David's tax returns for the last 2 years, claiming a caregiver credit." I was speechless. "The problem is,
You were also filing your own tax returns from your janitorial job. The IRS computers flagged the discrepancy, the same Social Security number being claimed by two different households. They've opened an investigation into you, Margaret, for tax evasion. Tax evasion. The words sounded like they belonged to a hardened criminal, not a 67-year-old woman who had followed the rules her entire life. Victoria hadn't just stolen my money and my house. She had taken my good name, a name I had spent a lifetime keeping clean, and dragged it through the mud. She had put me in the crosshairs of the federal government. The total is staggering, Ben concluded. Between the diverted funds, the credit cards, and the loan, she's frauded you for over $78,000 in cash. And that's on top of the lake house itself, which is valued at over $200,000. And now she has you facing a federal investigation. The unseen web she had spun was intricate and terrifying. She had entangled my life in a net of crime and deceit. My simple quest to find out about a mysterious house had led me into a dark labyrinth. "What do we do now, Ben?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Now," he said, and I could hear the steely determination in his voice. "We stop defending. We start attacking. We have the proof. We have the numbers. It's time to set a trap of our own." The next week was a blur of phone calls and meetings in Ben Carter's small, cluttered office. He showed me the documents, the credit card statements filled with lavish purchases, the loan agreement with my forged signature, the fraudulent tax forms. Seeing it all in black and white was sickening, but it also fueled the fire inside me. This wasn't just an insult anymore. This was a full-scale assault on my life. "She thinks she has David wrapped around her finger," Ben said, pacing in front of his desk. "She's counting on him to smooth this over, to convince you to accept a quiet settlement and an apology. Her counterattack, accusing you of being mentally senile, was designed to isolate you and make you seem unreliable. We're going to use that to our advantage." "How?" I asked. "We're going to make her believe her plan is working. We're going to make her overconfident. We're going to bait the trap, and she's going to walk right into it." The plan was simple, yet brilliant, and it required me to give the performance of a lifetime. That evening, I gathered all my courage and called Victoria. It was the first time we'd spoken since she'd stormed out of my apartment. She answered on the second ring, her voice cold and wary. "What do you want, Margaret?"
I let my own voice tremble. I pitched it high with confusion and exhaustion, channeling every ounce of fear and hurt I'd felt over the past weeks. "Victoria, I've been thinking," I stammered. Maybe you were right. This has all been so confusing. My head is all mixed up." There was a moment of silence on her end. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. "What are you talking about?" she asked, a hint of suspicion in her tone. "My lawyer, he's talking about all these crazy things, credit cards and taxes. It's too much for me," I said, letting a sob catch in my throat. "David said, he said all you wanted was to help your parents, that you needed them to sign some papers to make the loan of the house official, so everything is legal and above board." I was feeding her own lies back to her, wrapped in a package of surrender. "Yes," she said slowly, testing the waters. "That's all I ever wanted, to make sure everything was properly documented." "Well, can we just do that then?" I asked, sounding like a defeated old woman. "I don't want to fight anymore. I just want this to be over. Can we all meet at the lake house? You, me, your parents? We can sign whatever needs to be signed and put this whole mess behind us." The bait was laid. I held my breath, waiting for her to bite. There was a long pause. "You want to come to the lake house?" she asked, the surprise evident in her voice. "I want this to be over," I repeated pitifully. "Please, Victoria." "All right," she said finally, and I could hear the note of triumph she was trying to suppress.
All right, Margaret, we can do that. How about this Saturday, around noon? We'll get the papers drawn up. Thank you, Victoria, I whispered, and I hung up before she could hear the ice-cold resolve underneath my trembling voice. I immediately called Ben. I said, "She took the bait." He replied, "I knew she would," a grim satisfaction in his tone. Her ego wouldn't let her resist the chance to see you surrender in the very house she stole from you. "Okay, Margaret, the plan is in motion. I'll handle the arrangements. You just show up on Saturday and play your part. Remember, you're the confused, defeated old woman. Let her think she's won. The victory will be that much sweeter when we pull the rug out from under her." The next few days were the longest of my life. David called twice, confused. "Mom, what's going on? Victoria said you called her, that you want to sign some papers. My lawyer said not to let you sign anything." "David, I need you to trust me," I told him, offering no further explanation. "Just be at the lake house on Saturday at noon. Please, just trust me." I was asking a lot of him, but this was my battle to lead. Saturday was approaching. The stage was set at the beautiful house on Lake Morrison. Victoria was preparing for a signing ceremony to legitimize her crimes. She had no idea she was actually walking into her own judgment day. The drive to Lake Morrison on Saturday was surreal. Ben drove, his old sedan rattling along the highway. I sat in the passenger seat staring out at the blur of autumn colors. David was following behind us in his Mercedes, a silent, uncertain shadow. He had agreed to come, but his confusion was palpable. We arrived a few minutes before noon. The house was even more beautiful than I had imagined. It was a sprawling, ranch-style home, built of dark wood and river stone, with large windows that overlooked the shimmering blue water of the lake. A plume of white smoke rose from the stone chimney. It looked like a picture from a magazine, a perfect image of cozy, wealthy contentment, the image of everything that had been stolen from me. Ben pulled into the long gravel driveway and parked behind a familiar-looking minivan. "Her parents are here," he said quietly. "Showtime, Margaret. Remember your part." I took a deep breath, smoothed down my simple wool coat, and got out of the car. I let my shoulders slump, my steps falter, as if the short walk to the front door was a great effort. David came up beside me, his face a mixture of concern and anxiety. "Mom, are you sure about this?" "It'll be fine, David," I said, my voice weak. Victoria opened the door before we could knock. She was beaming, a triumphant, gracious hostess. "Margaret! David! I'm so glad you could make it. Come in out of the cold." She ushered me into a large living room. A fire crackled in a massive stone fireplace. Two older people, who I assumed were her parents, stood up from a plush sofa. Her mother was a small, bird-like woman with a nervous smile. Her father was a portly man who looked at me with open curiosity. "Mom, Dad, this is David's mother, Margaret." "It's so nice to finally meet you," her mother said, shaking my hand. "We've heard so much about you." I wondered what lies she had been told. "Victoria has everything ready," her father boomed. "Good to get all this paperwork sorted out. A handshake just doesn't cut it these days, you know?" On the heavy oak coffee table, a stack of papers was neatly arranged next to a fountain pen. Victoria gestured for me to sit on the sofa. "I had my lawyer draw these up," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "It's just a simple agreement. It formalizes the loan of the property to my parents and outlines a repayment plan for the funds I borrowed. It protects everyone. Once you sign, this whole misunderstanding is over." She was magnificent in her deception, so confident, so in control. She believed she had won so completely that she was now dictating the terms of my surrender. I looked at the papers, my eyes feigning confusion. "There are so many words," I said, my voice frail. "It's just standard legal language, Margaret," Victoria said, soothingly, patting my hand. Don't you worry your pretty little head. Just sign right here on the bottom line." She handed me the pen. This was the moment. The entire room watched me. David looked like he was about to be physically ill. Victoria's parents smiled encouragingly. Victoria's own smile was one of pure, unadulterated victory. I took the pen. My hand trembled, part of it an act and part of it genuine nerves. I leaned over the table, positioning the nib of the pen just above the signature line. And then I set the pen down. "Actually," I said, my voice suddenly clear and firm, all trace of frailty gone, "I think my lawyer should look at this first." Victoria's smile faltered. "Your lawyer? Margaret, we agreed." "Oh, he's already here." On cue, a side door leading from the kitchen opened. Ben Carter stepped into the room. He was no longer the overworked legal aide in a wrinkled shirt. He was wearing a crisp, dark suit and a tie. He held a leather briefcase in his hand. He looked sharp, serious, and completely in charge. Victoria's jaw dropped. She stared at him, then at me, the color draining from her face. Who are you?"
"My name is Ben Carter," he said, his voice calm and professional as he walked to the center of the room. "I am Margaret Harrison's legal counsel." Victoria's mother gasped. Her father's jovial expression hardened. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. "The meaning," Ben said, placing his briefcase on the coffee table and snapping it open, "is that my client will not be signing this fraudulent document. Instead, we're here to discuss another set of documents." He began pulling out files, laying them out on the table one by one, a methodical, devastating display. "This," he said, holding up a document, "is a copy of the deed to this house, which was purchased by David Harrison for his mother. And this is a forensic analysis of the forged signature used to transfer it." He laid out another file. "These are the bank records for the fraudulent account opened in my client's name." Another file. "These are the credit card statements totaling over $30,000 in fraudulent charges." Another. "This is the $25,000 personal loan application, also containing a forged signature." And a final one. "And this is a copy of a notice from the Internal Revenue Service informing my client that she is under investigation for tax evasion thanks to your daughter filing false tax returns." The room was utterly silent, save for the crackling of the fire. Victoria's parents stared at the mountain of evidence, their faces a mask of horror and disbelief. Victoria stood frozen, her face white as a sheet. The trap had been sprung. "Victoria Harrison," Ben said, his voice ringing with authority, "you have not borrowed anything. You have systematically committed multiple felonies, defrauding my client of her property, her savings, and her good name. This isn't a family misunderstanding to be solved with a signature. This is a crime scene." As if on cue, there was a firm knock at the front door. David, his face grim and resolved, walked over and opened it. Two plainclothes police detectives stood on the doorstep. One of them looked past David, his eyes landing on a stunned and terrified Victoria. "Victoria Harrison," he asked, "we have a warrant for your arrest." Watching the detectives lead Victoria away was an out-of-body experience. She didn't scream or fight. All the bravado, all the manipulative fire was gone. She was just a small, pale woman in an expensive sweater, her wrists bound by shiny metal handcuffs. Her parents were a mess. Her mother was sobbing uncontrollably into a handkerchief, while her father just stood there, his face gray and slack, staring at the pile of incriminating documents on his coffee table as if they were venomous snakes. The police were professional and quiet.
They informed Victoria's parents that the house was now considered part of an active criminal investigation, and that they would need to vacate the premises within 48 hours. Then, just like that, they were gone, taking my daughter-in-law with them. Then Carter packed his briefcase, gave my arm a reassuring squeeze, and told me he would be in touch on Monday to discuss next steps. He and David had a brief, quiet conversation by the door before Ben left. Then it was just David and me, standing in the middle of the beautiful, stolen living room. The house was silent, but it was a loud silence, filled with the echoes of deceit and confrontation. The fire in the hearth still crackled merrily, a cheerful sound that felt obscene in the wake of what just happened. David said, his voice hoarse, "Mom, are you okay?" I couldn't answer. I didn't know what I was. I wasn't a victim anymore, but I didn't feel like a victor. I just felt empty, numb. I walked slowly through the house, touching the smooth, polished wood of the dining table, running my hand along the soft fabric of the curtains. This all was supposed to have been mine. For 2 years, this peace, this comfort, this security had been my right, and it had all been a lie. The master bedroom had a large window with a breathtaking view of the lake. A half-read book lay on the nightstand next to an expensive-looking reading lamp. I could picture Victoria's parents here, sleeping peacefully in a bed paid for by my hardship, reading under a light powered by electricity I couldn't afford. The thought made me feel cold inside. The victory was real. The justice was coming. But it didn't instantly erase the 2 years of struggle. It didn't magically restore the peace of mind I had lost. Winning the battle didn't mean the war wounds had vanished. It wasn't a finish line. It was just the beginning of a long, slow process of cleaning up the wreckage. I had spent my life cleaning up other people's messes. Now, it seemed, I had to figure out how to clean up my own. The 6 months that followed were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and difficult changes. Victoria, facing overwhelming evidence, pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud. The judge, citing the calculated nature of her crimes and the vulnerability of her victim, sentenced her to 18 months in a federal correctional facility. The divorce between her and David was finalized quickly and quietly. Her parents, shamed and displaced, sold their own home and moved to Arizona to live with other relatives. The saga was, legally, over.
But healing is not a legal process. For a long time, I couldn't bring myself to go back to the lake house. David had it professionally cleaned and had all of Victoria's parents' belongings removed, but it still felt haunted. So I stayed in my little apartment, the numbness slowly giving way to a landscape of complicated emotions. David was a constant presence. He called every day. He insisted on taking me to my doctor's appointments, where I could finally be honest about my medication. Every Sunday, without fail, he would show up at my door for what he called our weekly breakfast tradition, bringing coffee and fresh cinnamon rolls from a local bakery owned by a lovely woman named Mrs. Chen. We talked more in those months than we had in the previous 10 years. We talked about Robert, about his childhood, about the pressures of his job. We talked around the edges of Victoria, never mentioning her by name, but always acknowledging the chasm her actions had carved through our lives. He was rebuilding the trust between us, one cinnamon roll at a time. One Sunday, he told me he was seeing someone. "Her name is Jennifer," he said, a hesitant smile on his face. "She's different." He explained she was a forensic accountant he'd met through a colleague. On our third date, he said, with a wry laugh, she told me I was far too trusting and needed to work on my personal boundaries. I couldn't help but smile. It seemed he was finally learning. It was Jennifer who, in her practical, no-nonsense way, gave me the push I needed. David mentioned my reluctance to deal with the lake house, and she'd simply said, "Well, it's an asset. An unused asset is a liability. She either needs to sell it or claim it." Her words stuck with me. Claim it.
The next weekend, I asked David to drive me to the lake. I walked into the house alone, armed with cleaning supplies and a box of my own things. I spent the entire day scrubbing. I scrubbed the floors, the windows, the walls. I was physically washing away the residue of the past, but I was also performing a kind of exorcism. With every swipe of the sponge, I was reclaiming my space. I threw out the expensive, impersonal furniture they had left behind, and over the next few weeks, slowly filled the rooms with things I loved. I went to flea markets and secondhand stores, finding pieces with character and history. A comfortable, overstuffed armchair for reading, a sturdy wooden dining table for future family meals. I hung my own pictures on the walls. Robert and me on our wedding day, David as a gap-toothed little boy. One morning, a month after I'd moved in for good, I officially retired from my janitorial job. I called my supervisor, Mrs. Henderson, and thanked her for everything. It was a strange, liberating feeling. Now, a full year after that fateful Thanksgiving, my life is unrecognizable. My home is no longer a battlefield, it is a sanctuary. My favorite part of the day is the morning. I wake up before the sun, make a cup of tea, and sit in my armchair by the large window. I watch the sky turn from inky black to bruised purple, then to fiery orange as the sun rises over the lake, painting the water in shades of gold and pink. The peace is profound. It's a peace I fought for. I often think about what Victoria stole from me. It wasn't just the money or the house. She stole 2 years of security, 2 years of dignity, 2 years of my life where I could have been living without fear. No court can ever give that back. But in a strange way, the experience also gave me something. It gave me back my son. It showed me a strength in myself I never knew I possessed. I don't know if I'll ever truly forgive her. Forgiveness is a complicated thing. But I have chosen to stop letting her betrayal define my present. She tried to steal my future, to write me off as a confused old woman whose story was over. But in the end, she only delayed it. Now, my future is fully and completely mine to live exactly as I choose. And as I sit here, watching the sun climb higher into the sky, I choose peace.